cable cast on method is a stable cast on. It kind of bounces back if you stretch it out a little bit, whereas some other cast ons like the backwards loop or the knitted cast on method will kind of stay stretched out if you pull on it. But the cable cast on is a pretty stable cast on. I love to use this cast on when casting on stitches for the neckline of a sweater or at the underarms, because you can cast on a large number of stitches and have those stitches be nice and stable and strong. It's also great when casting on at the very beginning of your project. And in this tutorial I will show you how to do this cast on in both of those ways, starting from a slip knot and also in the middle of your project, such as for an underarm or a neckline. When doing the cable cast on at the very beginning of your project, start with a slip knot on your left needle, and the very first stitch of the cable cast on would have to be done as a knitted cast on stitch. I have another tutorial on how to do the knitted cast on stitch. If you're a beginner knitter, you may want to check that video out too. The knitted cast on is basically done by going into the first stitch, knitting a stitch, but keeping both the first stitch and the new stitch on the needle, and then dropping the new stitch onto the top of the left needle. Once there are 2 stitches on your left needle, you can begin the cable cast on. The difference between the knitted cast on and the cable cast on is that the knitted cast on always goes into the stitch that's closest to the tip, but the cable cast on goes between the first 2 stitches, like that. So we go between the first 2 stitches, wrap the yarn over, draw through a loop, and place that on the needle. So I always want to leave this a little loose at first, maybe not that loose, just so I can get the needle in there. If it's too tight, it's going to be hard to get the needle in. So make sure it's a little loose, and once your needle's in there, you can give it a little tug. Pull through a loop, stick it on the needle. Go between the stitches, pull through a loop, and stick it on the stitches. And once you have the amount of stitches that you need cast on completely, you just begin knitting or purling or doing whatever stitch pattern your pattern calls for. In many of my patterns, I use the cable cast on method at the underarm or the neckline. When doing that, you would have knit across a right side row, ending after the right side row. But to do the cable cast on, you'll need to turn your work so that the wrong side's facing. With the wrong side facing, your stitches are on the left needle, just like they would be if you were starting the beginning of a project with this cast on. You can go between the first 2 stitches and cast on however many stitches are indicated in the pattern. Let's say there are 4 stitches. Oops, I missed. 1, 2, 3, 4. There are 4 stitches. And then to continue joining to the next piece, say this is an underarm, we would have to turn this around again so that the right side's facing. So say this is the front of the body and here is the underarm, and then the back stitches, you would just have the right side of the back stitches over here, and you would continue working along those with the right side facing. So that is how you do the cable cast on for an underarm, and it would also work in the same manner for a neckline or any other place in the middle of your project where you need to cast on stitches.